Welcome to the Dom Sub Devotion Podcast.
Every episode of Dom Sub Devotion shares the lessons learned from our experience of love, devotion, and desire inside of our 24/7 Dom Sub marriage.
We've found that dominance and submission is more than just a kink. For us, it's been a path to deep intimacy and desire that lasts over the long term. We share our experience through this podcast to be the example that we didn't have when we started down this path, and to help you find your way to a dynamic that works in your real life.
You can learn more about us and our courses and offerings in the show notes and at infinitedevotion.com. Thank you for listening.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dom Sub Devotion. This week on the podcast, I'm doing something that I've never done before. I'm interviewing one of our followers. And Robert is somebody who I've met in person. We met a couple of years ago now.
Yep.
When
Probably.
when Dawn and I were traveling through his neck of the woods as we travel around the country, which is somewhere in the United States, but not the background that you see if you're watching this on YouTube. And I've communicated back and forth with Robert so much over the last several years, and he has such a unique breadth of experiences in life, and specifically in so many areas that I've never touched around, and things that have helped him grow as a man. And I wanted to bring him on for the first ever follower interview to just have him share some of his experiences, to try to give my listeners some different perspectives, things that you don't normally hear from me that might be valuable tools or things that you can learn from another person here who's been on a decades-long journey to becoming the best version of himself. And that is really what dominance is all about. So, Robert, welcome. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
The first thing that spurred my interest in having you on here was your extensive history in the martial arts. And you had mentioned to me one time what that has done for you in helping you in so many different ways for yourself. So I guess to start out, can you just tell us and remind me a little bit of what that history is? Like, how did you get started in it, and how long have you been in the martial arts? What have you studied? What's that history been like for you?
Oh, it's 2/3 of my life, give or take. Since the age of 20, I had about 6 months of training as a teenager, which is a sidetrack we won't wander down. But in college at the time, in the mid-late 80s, they had a core curriculum requirement that you had to take 2 semesters of PE. And, just like recess and playtime for kids these days, that seems to have gone out the window. But I tried meditation, yoga, the first semester, didn't really care for it. It wasn't dynamic enough. And I was doing all-nighters in my primary field of study, and I'd pass out in yoga class when we're all laying there on our backs, and he'd have to come wake me up so we could go get on with the class. So I signed up for karate the second semester.
Pose. It's not
Yes.
literally corpse pose. You're supposed
Exactly.
to be awake.
Yeah, but I was doing a really good corpse.
Yeah.
I guess I had a knack for it. So the second semester, karate was an option. I thought, well, that sounds a lot more dynamic and interesting than yoga. And that's how I met my instructor, who was in his mid-upper 40s at the time. He'd emigrated from Korea in 1968 at the age of 30, I think. And so he's in his mid-upper 80s at this point, continuing to train and teach. And he was kind of like a real-life Mr. Miyagi. It was really something. The karate classes at the college were 100 to 130 students. And I wound up signing up to continue training with him at the end of the semester. And it's been a long, long grind through all of my adult life, basically. And I'm really fortunate because I didn't set out to pursue martial arts. It was kind of an accidental discovery. And I'm just sad I didn't discover it a lot younger, because I went through 4 years in a state of severe clinical depression all throughout high school. And, had I started training at 10 or 12 or 14, it would have made those challenges a lot more navigable than they were.
And so have you continued to train under that same teacher for this whole time?
Yep, same exact teacher. Yep,
Wow.
almost 40 years now.
Wow. And so I'm sure he's been learning and growing, and then you've been kind of following along in
Exactly. Yeah,
in
I mean, one of the things I admire about him is that he is not dogmatic. He wants to continue to grow, wants to continue to evolve his, teaching methods, his understanding of good body mechanics. All of his teachers, all of his peers have either died or retired or are, just too debilitated from old school training back in the day that, he's alone. He has no peers in martial arts really. And so, he learns from the students, he learns from life, he learns from, his own mistakes. And, it's a good example. And what has made it possible to train so long into an older age is that he learned early on that the teaching method in Korea in the middle of the war was way less than optimal. He was developing back problems, knee problems. He developed an ulcer, and he was only in his teens, at early 20s. And he thought, this is supposed to be making me stronger. What's going on? So he started thinking deeply at a very young age about, what do I need to do differently? And that set him on the path of, trying to train in ways that are in harmony with your natural body mechanics and breathing properly, which nobody was doing. So he was, he figured this stuff out on his own, and it dovetailed really nicely decades later when I saw an author on Joe Rogan, James Nestor, who'd written a book called Breath, and I highly recommend it to everybody. It's an amazing, fascinating book that goes way down the rabbit hole on breath work, why it helps, and so because he approached training with an eye towards it being a lifestyle martial art, something for your whole life. Um, the analogy I often make for people is that instead of training really, really hard and burning out in 5 or 10 years, or your body breaks down, or it's too much contact and it's something for teenagers or 20 somethings. This is intended to be, something you can continue to do your whole life. So it'll continue to serve you. And, it's also rewarding to be teaching and paying forward to other people the things that I've benefited from in learning from him.
You mentioned this period of depression in your teens, and I would love to hear for you what, obviously that sounds like it was a relatively contained period of your life, but a pretty intense one at the same time. I don't know if that's been something that has gone, if you come in and out of that at all through your adult life or not, but I'm curious how the study of martial arts, the study of karate for you in particular, has benefited you in being and feeling like you are as fully alive as you can be.
Yeah. Thankfully, the depression uh, period was mostly an isolated incident. It was kind of the natural progression from a very dysfunctional family, really emotionally toxic environment. Um, and the last straw was when my parents separated. And that's when I just went straight off the cliff and
Right.
into a hole and stayed there for 4 years. Um, when I dug myself out of that, well, when I sort of didn't really think I was in a state of depression anymore, was about the time I started college. But that first year in college, I didn't have any drive. I didn't have any motivation. I was there because that's what you're supposed to do, not
Mhm.
because I really wanted to or I had a goal. And after that first year, I just thought, I'm wasting my time, my dad's money. Let me take a gap year. live life without a degree, hopefully get very motivated, to engage. And that worked out really well. When I came back from that gap year was also the year that I met my karate instructor. So that's really when it was a combination of the gap year and living hand to mouth, dirt poor, and discovering training that suddenly I went from just flatlining to upwards. And the combination of those two things, having some desire and drive and motivation based on real life, consequences of life without a degree, was a great start. And then the confidence that I was building from doing something that was both physically active but mentally challenging. That's one of the things about martial arts that's so different from going to the gym. It's multidimensional. It's mental, it's physical. When you're sparring, you're playing psychological games with the other person. As you begin instructing, you have to take on more of a leadership role and, present a good example, learn how to communicate effectively. Truism is that you can know something up to one level, but until you can teach it, you don't really have as full an understanding as when you can convey it to other people. Um, so the seminal moment after all of that upward progress, the downside and the interest, one of the most interesting parts of my life is the fact that coming back from the gap year, I had to move back in under my dad's roof to go to college, money issues, etc. And after I'd started training, was loving it. I was engaged with school, making straight A's, having fun. But one night, out of the blue, like a lightning bolt, I was lying in bed, and the stress building of 18 months being under the same roof with my dad, it was like a psychotic break. My brain just let go. I'm lying in bed, and all of a sudden, it's like I'm tumbling in space in a void and just having the most agonizing, psychologically torturous state that I've ever experienced. And it was horrifying. I mean, it was just surreal. I've never heard someone describe just like a mental break like that, just coming out of nowhere. And if I had had my hands on a firearm, I would have stuck it in my mouth and pulled the trigger in an instant just to make it stop. Um, yeah, it was not a good night. And I finally passed out from exhaustion. I mean, I finally survived that, very profoundly negative experience, passed out. When I woke up in the morning, I didn't have that same sense of crises or pain or break or whatever, but I was also filled with an incredibly strong determination to take steps to ensure that that would never, ever happen to me again. I drove directly to this part-time job I had, quit, got my last paycheck, drove directly to a gun store, tried to buy an 18-inch 12 gauge. They didn't have one in stock. So they took a 28-inch model in the back and hacksawed 10 inches off the barrel for me. Because, you can't stick the muzzle under your chin and reach the trigger on a 28-inch barrel. My arms aren't that long. Bought a box of shells, got back in my truck, and I drove out of the city, out into the country. Because even though I didn't think I was necessarily going to go through with it, I had to have a long talk with myself and, fish or cut bait. And I didn't want to, do this in my dad's spare bedroom and leave a mess for somebody else to clean up. So even in that state, I was thoughtful like that. I drove out into a field, got out of the truck, walked about 50 feet away, sat down and cross-legged in the field and loaded the shotgun. And I laid it across my lap and I had a long, hard talk with myself. And I said, the way I've been living is not working for me. If that kind of thing can happen to me because I'm in this toxic environment and, I can't keep going like that. But I had no external support and I was still not really fully formed and ready to take on, like trying to work my way through school. And so either I stick this thing under my chin and blow my head off now, and make sure this never happens again. Or if I don't, I have to completely tear my life down and figure out some other way to live such that this will never happen to me again. And many years later, I heard Jocko Willink talk about extreme ownership. And I was like, that's what I was doing. I
Mhm.
was taking on extreme ownership. Um, and I said, if I have to sleep under a bridge and dig ditches and eat McDonald's and, wrap myself up in cardboard at night, eh, I won't be 6 feet under, and at least there'll be a chance I will get somewhere and I will be happy. And so I lit a match. I burned my life to the ground. I've had almost no contact with my dad for the rest of my life, and he's since passed away. And it was about 30 years of no contact. And I was homeless for a while. And I did burn my life to the ground. And I started from absolute zero. But that was taking extreme ownership and saying, you know, I'm not going to let that sort of thing ever happen to me again.
What are some of the things that happened in the immediate term after that when I imagine that's about when you probably cut off the contact with dad and probably found somewhere else to live, or if that was the homeless period. But like, how did you start building then? Like, what were you doing with your to actually make that shift?
You know, when I try to put together a really specific timeline of, where I lived immediately thereafter and, how I navigated that, I've got fragments and snippets, but it's not a nice linear timeline. I didn't keep a diary at the time. I know that for a period, I went to the karate school. Told my instructor, hey, you know, I've got nowhere to live. Can I sleep on the mats? And he gave me a key and I slept on the mats in the training area. Showered in the karate school. I'd go to the grocery store and buy produce and, like cans of soup I could heat in a microwave. And that was all I had. Um, a guy that I had worked for as a teenager, he let me sleep in a spare bedroom for a little while. I bounced back and forth between Austin trying to find a job and relocate there and coming back into Houston and couch surfing at a friend's place and working, kind of a contract gig for a place I'd worked at previously. So, I mean, it was a hodgepodge of different things. And it really wasn't until I met someone who was a professor at the same university where I'd been previously attending, who had started training at the karate school. And he saw something in me, needed someone to work in his office in the evenings, and offered me that job. And I could, get back into classes, get re-engaged with continuing my college degree, and even offered me a place to stay until I had things sorted out. So both in my teenage years and afterward, I was really blessed. I mean, I was cursed with a very toxic environment and, enough to drive me to multiple suicide attempts during my teenage years. But I was also blessed with a ridiculously large number of total strangers who crossed my paths at different points and said, there's something about this feral, you know, very raw human being, and went way out of their way to help me survive that period. So I have plenty to be grateful for.
And at a certain point in that, there was a like I'm hearing a story of a big like taking of responsibility for yourself and your life.
Yep.
And that's clearly something that's progressed a lot for you over the years, but specifically to martial arts, and then I'd like to get more into breath work and some of the other places you have personal experience with, but specifically to martial arts, how what was the role that played for you in developing this sense of ownership and responsibility once you decided and you made that choice? What did martial arts do for you towards that end?
This is a conversation I've had several times with my nephew, who's kind of a clone of me, very, very similar. Um, Training, because again, it's both mental and physical. You're learning skills that are practical in the real world. Heaven forbid you need to use them, but better to carry, what is it? Speak softly and carry a big stick. Um, Having you talk about competence or dominance. Part of dominance is having competency in a variety of domains.
Mm.
And I think one of the most core areas that a man should be competent in is self-defense, is being, Jordan Peterson calls it the capacity to be a monster, or that you should be a monster, and that you also have the self-control emotionally, physically, mentally, to keep that capacity for extreme violence in check. And you only pull it out when it's going to be deployed for virtuous purposes. Defending a loved one, defending a stranger, defending yourself. But if you don't have that capacity for violence, then you're not really a gentle man. You're just harmless. A gentleman has the ability to wreak havoc and only does so when it's appropriate. Um, and I can't think of a more immediate and direct confidence builder than knowing that you can handle yourself physically. And when it comes to interpersonal interactions, because when you're teaching, that's public speaking, but you're doing so in a constrained domain that's very focused on the task at hand. It's not just getting up in front of 300 people and talking about some PowerPoint presentation. You're talking about an area you already have subject matter expertise in, to a group that's all there participating and learning that. So the public speaking part and the leadership skills that you have to develop to be an effective teacher, to be good at it, all play a part in building your confidence, your sense of competency. And as I keep trying to explain to my nephew, even if you're in an environment which has nothing to do with self-defense, but you're going to go talk in front of a board of directors, you're going to do any kind of speaking in a work setting. No matter what it is, your brain is 50,000 years old. The DNA, the stress response is really geared toward saber-toothed tigers. You're stressed and you get this adrenaline dump and your vision narrows and, in extreme cases, auditory exclusion. All these kinds of responses are designed to run like heck from a saber-toothed tiger. That doesn't serve you well when you have to get up and do something stressful like make a presentation to your boss or to a panel. So if you know that you can take everybody in the room on a physical level, there's something about that that plays directly back into that lizard brain that says you're not in as much danger as you would have perceived if you had no ability to defend yourself. And between that kind of short circuiting of that stress response, that very primordial stress response, and learning anchoring techniques like breathing, um, it allows you to navigate modern life stress, even though it doesn't have anything to do with fighting.
This is exactly why I was excited to have you on here, because I knew there would be little insights, that ways that I'd never thought about something, and you just gave me one. So I want to put a little pin in this and see if you have anything to add to it. But the stress response that we feel a lot of times as men when we are out of control, when there's uncertainty present in our surroundings, especially uncertainty that feels dangerous. You mentioned like PowerPoint presentation in front of a board of directors, sure, but also emotionally intense and chaotic situations can bring up that same kind of fear-based response. And the point you just made or illuminated for me was the role that having physical power, the ability to fight, and knowing that you have that capacity builds in terms, for you at least, has built in terms of a place you can go inside of yourself where you know that you're safe.
You know what's interesting though, you had said something in this started our private exchange around breathing. You had said something that was really illuminating for me, which is that as much as the martial arts training has improved my confidence, my ability to handle stress and things like that, I it reinforced to me that it didn't do diddly squat when it came to having being in the presence of a female partner who's experiencing a lot of turbulence or even lashing out. That emotional storm uh, completely bypasses um, my otherwise pretty robust stress management infrastructure in all kinds of other domains. And that goes back to, that childhood wounding and not having the skills verbally and emotionally developed from a very stunted home life,
Mhm.
left me completely uh, ill prepared to how to navigate that. And that's where a lot of, I've been enjoying your content because, um, the things you've talked about developing the ability to stay emotionally regulated and centered and be present. The most recent podcast you did about how it's not an either or, either a heart or a spine, but you can't do both. That was a great conversation because, yes, recognizing that you can have one and not forego the other is a great brick in the wall, building up I don't know what the right analogy is, but a great piece of the foundation or a great piece of the puzzle. And so that's been a whole separate journey for me, is navigating the emotional turbulence that the martial arts has kind of left me still blind, or there's still a hole in my defenses or a hole in my strength that I've made a lot of progress on. And it helps to have a partner who already comes to the table with a great deal of emotional regulation. Um, Orion Taraban has said, 80, 90% of a successful relationship is who you pick in the first place. You can't take, a broken vase, in a million pieces and glue it together and have a good vase. I mean, yeah, it's not your job to fix and save somebody else. They need to be able to come to the table with a certain core minimum of capabilities, emotional self-regulation. You can go on a journey together and continue to get better, but um, I've had toxic relationships.
Yeah, and there's a piece to that. First of all, I just want to make a note for anybody that is listening now, since this episode's going to be coming out a little ways down the road from when we're recording it. The episode that you just mentioned came out on January 19th, and it's called Are You Strong Enough to Be a Dom? So if anybody wants to go back and listen to that one, go check that one out. It's a great one. Um, but for me, it seems like you can almost any relationship where there is a heavy, like there's a big attraction, there's a big pull and draw to each other. Almost anything can be they really can be great if both people are willing to grow. That is the one fracture that can't be overlooked. You can't do anything until both people are willing to grow. If both people are willing to grow, you can turn a dumpster fire into a really beautiful connection and a beautiful relationship. But if one person's committed to stoking that fire, like you can't go anywhere.
Yeah, and I saw, I think it was somewhere else just in the last few days, and I might blank on this. Compatibility is overrated because who you are now and who the other person is now, you might be compatible right now, but if you're growing in this direction, and both of you are going to be different people in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, you might be compatible in the moment, in a snapshot of time. But if you're growing in different directions or one person grows and one person doesn't, then it's not going to make the long haul. You can have fun in the short term, but it's not a long haul uh, compatible or it's not going to be a marriage relationship for the long term.
Another thing that you brought up reminded me of this quote, and I've been on a streak of episodes where I'm asking people, remind me who this quote is by, because I don't remember. But it was that there's a certain type of gentleness that only strength can afford.
Mhm. I don't know the source of the quote, but that's absolutely correct. Genuine strength, you know, on all levels, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. Only when you have legitimate, genuine strength can you be gentle to, little kids, animals, hurt puppies,
Mhm.
a woman who's all up in her feelings. Um, the people who have caricatures of strength are operating from a foundation of weakness.
Generally. So you've had some other life experiences too. I'd love to hear a little bit about your history with breath work specifically. You mentioned that book, um, which I'll put a link to in the show notes. But how has breath work tied in with martial arts in terms of you growing in that strength, the like the internal feeling of being solid?
So,
How's that been for you?
yeah, so again, one of the things I'm grateful to have stumbled across the teacher that I've had for 40 years is his emphasis on breathing. Um, it's not just about avoiding gassing out because you're exerting yourself, but you're constricting your breathing, and so you aerobically run out of steam very quickly. But I only learned decades later that his default breathing, which is a relatively quick inhale and then a long, slow exhale, he calls it Tanjan breathing. Chinese say qi for the life force energy in your lower abdomen. Korean, it's Tanjan. You make a small hole with your mouth, and then you tense your abdomen and you force the air out against that restriction and you extend that exhale as long as you can. And what I also emphasize to my students, will typically be in a stance and push like you're trying to push a pickup truck down the shoulder of the freeway that's run out of gas, is that I don't want them to be like rolling their eyes or thinking about their homework assignments while they're doing this. I want them staring forward with focus and intensity as they're doing that breathing exercise. And I learned, decades later on Huberman that the reason that that style of breathing lowers your heart rate, lowers your blood pressure, lowers your cortisol level, does all these things to help you return to a state of calm, grounded, you know, peace, is that the body, wants to maintain homeostasis, maintain a certain equilibrium. And when you breathe in, the size of your chest cavity expands and your blood pressure drops. So when you breathe in, there's a signal that goes up to the brain and comes back down the vagus nerve saying, oh, blood pressure is dropping, increase the heart rate. So your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure comes back up to where it should be. But when you start breathing out, if you make that exhale much, much longer than the inhale, the size of your chest cavity is getting smaller, your blood pressure would go up a little bit. And so the body says, oh, wait a minute, blood pressure is going up. Let's lower the heart rate. So if you have a short inhale, a short signal to increase your heart rate, but then a very long exhale, that's a long period of time where your brain is saying, okay, slow the heart rate, slow the heart rate, slow the heart rate, maintain that blood pressure where we want it to be. And everything just kind of comes down and settles. So there's a biological explanation for why it works, which was, fun for me to learn after decades of knowing it in person through experience, but not knowing the science behind it. And there's a funny story. One of my homeless periods, God, another one was I was sleeping in the back of my truck. I had a job, a night job at the university, but I was only taking home like 800 bucks a month. And I thought, why spend 600 bucks a month on an apartment that I'm only going to see for 8 hours while I'm asleep? And I had a background in camping and stuff. So I had a camper shell on my pickup. So I just had a sleeping bag in the back of my truck and foot locker with some clothes. And I'd park behind the university gym and sleep there at night, go shower in the morning. And I had a meal plan at the dorms. So I spent like 16 hours, 24 hours a day on campus. Um, Breath work. I got to land the plane here. So a student, grad student, heard about this lifestyle I was living in. Said, "Oh, we have a spare bedroom. Come live with us." So I went and couch lived with them for a few months. But every morning I would do like 5 minutes of that breath work. And then one day I came to the karate school and I was late and I was in the back of the class and my teacher came out of his office and he called me out of the class to come into his office. I thought, uh-oh, what did I do now? Or I'm gonna get yelled at for being late or something. I don't know. So I go around to his office and he's sitting behind his desk and he's just sitting there looking at me with a little smile on his face. And he said, "You've been meditating." And I said, no, sir, I haven't. And he just went, "What? Uh, no, sir. Not meditating? No." And he was just so befuddled because he was so confident that he knew that I'd been meditating. And this went back and forth. It was getting really awkward. And I finally, to try to like get off the X, I said, "Well, I have been doing Tanjan breathing." And he went, "Ah, okay, that's it." Because I could feel something different in you. You bring a different energy to class. And he could feel the difference. And from me doing that on my own every day for 5 minutes. And when it comes to the eyes and being completely mentally engaged and focused with intensity, I would get in trouble with my previous girlfriend because we'd go to a nice restaurant and it's loud and the waiter's standing on the other side of the table trying to tell you about the specials. And I don't care about the specials. I already know what I want. But I'm trying to be respectful to the waiter. It's their job to tell me the specials. They have to do it. So I'm trying to be respectful. So I'm paying attention and I'm trying to hear what they're saying over the noise. So I'm kind of leaning in and I'm focusing, trying to hear them. And they would start getting scared. And my girlfriend would get mad at me because I'm scaring the wait staff. It's like I'm just trying to hear the specials. But you know, when you've done enough work on yourself, and I'm just leaning in, trying to pay attention to be respectful, and I start scaring people with my eye contact. And I think that that says something about, you know, what happens when you train with a lot of commitment and a mental engagement, not just exercising your muscles, lifting weights or something.
It was the very first thing that I noticed about you when I met you in person was the stillness of your eye contact. The very first thing that stood out to me when we sat down at that restaurant, you and Don and I, and had a beverage, I think, and we're just talking, was
Hmm.
the steely calmness behind your eyes. And so it's really interesting to hear that story because it lines up so perfectly with what I experienced and felt in you. And a really interesting thing that I take from that is hearing your teacher in his sensitivity being able to feel the difference in how you were showing up. And I talk to men about this all the time. I teach it in my Becoming a Dominant Man course that you have to have some sort of a practice that you do on a regular daily basis to help ground you back inside of your body. And that to me, like that sounds like exactly what that was for you, is you were learning what it meant to be inside of yourself.
Exactly. And I mean, we all spend way too much time on screens, too much time on our butts. Um, I have a family cabin that's been in the families for 85 years at this point. And I go up there every summer, and it's a completely unwinterized cabin with a fireplace and electricity and running water. That's about it. Um, and when I have an opportunity to chop some wood, it's like my happy place. I get to go up in the winter and shovel snow, and then summertime, sometimes I get to chop some wood. And then after, I think it was actually during that summer, I saw something on social media that the activity that scientists have found raises your testosterone like immediately in the moment more than any other physical activity is chopping wood. And that
Yep.
just made me howl. It's like, no wonder I like this so much.
Wait
you're
till the
you're using
biohackers
it.
get their hands on that one.
Oh yeah. Yeah, whether it's an axe or a firearm or anything else, it's a tool. It can be used to defend your loved ones or build a home, chop some wood, or it can be used to, bash someone into pieces. But you're taking an axe and you've got to have a lot of focus and you're being sort of destructive and constructive at the same time, which scratches an itch for men. It's great.
Yeah, as soon as the biohacker crowd gets a hold of the knowledge that that increases your testosterone, we're going to have a a glut of split firewood in the world, and then we're probably gonna have to rediscover the
Forest, reseed
well,
some forests.
yeah, that too. I was gonna say rediscover the joy of like heating our homes with wood fires. I was so bummed when when my dad sold the cabin, and because they were building a house, because I
Mm.
used to love to go there. It sounds a lot like yours and your experience there, except for the fact that there wasn't even running water, just an outhouse,
Oh, wow.
electricity in an outhouse in a one room cabin. And I would go up there for days on end. It was only a couple hours from my house when we lived in Minnesota. I'd go up there for days on end and no cell reception, no internet, no running water.
That
And
was your Walden Pond.
it was 100%. So much of the life that I've built came out of the time that I spent there staring into a campfire and writing with a pen on paper.
Mhm.
So yeah, I love that story. But I didn't go there to shovel snow. Snow is not a novelty to somebody who grew up and lived in it my whole adult life and childhood.
Yep.
So outside of the martial arts and breath work, you've got some other fun stories that have been just interesting parts of your growth and your development and coming into yourself. You mentioned before we hit record something I don't even know if I knew about you, but talk to me about racing and race cars.
Oh yeah. I scratched that itch really, really hard for like 15 years steady. And even though it was an amazing fun, and if I had, mounds of disposable income, I might go back and play with it some more. I feel like I can put it to bed safely. But I had always liked sports cars. And when I started to finally emerge from my homelessness and finished college and got my first professional job and all that sort of thing, started to feel like I was outgrowing, I was too old to be driving a Mustang and started thinking about what my next sports car would be. Wound up buying a 2 or 3 year old lightly used 911. Just loved that car to death. And within 6 months, I was ready to sell it because driving around the streets of the big city with straight roads, no curves, potholes, red lights, it's like, what am I doing with this thing? This isn't fun. And I actually bought a little truck as a daily driver to replace it before I sold the car. But then I discovered this thing called track days. And January of 2000, I went to my first track day. Didn't know a soul. And it was put on by the Porsche Club. Do you remember the 70s Camel cigarette commercials or advertisements? There'd
Mm.
always be like some guy with his shirt unbuttoned down to his navel with the blow-dried hair and the big 70s mustache with like a burning stick out of the fire, lighting his Camel cigarette and the blow-dried hair and all that. Very 70s. I was expecting the crowd at this racetrack, the Porsche Club crowd, to be like that. Blow-dried hair, shirts unbuttoned, acting like Corvette owners or something. And what I found was just a bunch of people who were really down to earth and having so much fun driving their cars the way they were meant to be driven. It's like, oh, cool. I feel at home. And the adrenaline and the mental focus and the stress of going out with my very shiny, beautiful, I called her like a mistress, and being so paranoid about damaging the car somehow. Um, I just got completely hooked. At the end of the first weekend, my face hurt, my cheeks were sore because I just been in this ecstatic grin for 48 hours straight, and it was like taking a hit off the crack pipe. So I started going to every single event. Within 2 years, they asked me to be an instructor, and my friends have been nagging me to go racing with them. And when they finally switched to what I thought was a proper race car, I bought a proper race car and started racing. And that unlocked a whole new level. And one of my friends famously said to me, in trying to convince me to make the transition from just track weekends to racing. So track weekends are great. There's nothing wrong with track weekends. But going to a track event and just driving is to racing what masturbation is to sex. Like, hmm, okay, that's good.
Great.
So yeah, yeah. And I tell you, it's a whole different level. And one of the things about racing that I found really fascinating is that, at least for me, before the race, I'd be very just nonchalant and, prep the car as best I can. But my attitude was, well, we'll just go out there and see what happens and, see how things go and do our best. But the minute the green flag drops, the fangs would come out. It was like a werewolf transformation. And we would all just be clawing and scratching and fighting over like that last foot or two to get on each other before you go flying into a turn at 100 miles an hour, about 6 inches apart, or even bumping against each other. And just the ferocity, the testosterone spike there must have been, you know, firewood chopping times two. And I realized that men have so few outlets to let that kind of aggression and intensity out. And when the checkered flag waved, everyone would come into the paddock and park their cars and hop out, and they'd be laughing and joking and telling stories about stuff that had happened during the race and help each other fix each other's car if it got broke or something. That Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, or normal person, werewolf, and back again was fascinating. And again, like developing competency in something, because we all drive, but everybody thinks they're a good driver. And I spent 12 years teaching people, and I'd go to the track events and I'd sit in the right seat, or I'd run classroom sessions. But you sit in the right seat with somebody who's never done it before, and they think they're a good driver, and they go out on the track. And as an instructor, you're just like struggling to stay awake because they're going so slowly. And you're wearing out the expression, more gas, more gas. Um, but yeah, so that new outlet for aggression and to be a monster. Because you also have to have a lot of trust in each other. Because if somebody's being an idiot, yeah, you could get hurt. More likely your wallet than your body, unlike racing motorcycles, which I've done that too. That was a whole different level of intensity and commitment and risk and testosterone is racing motorcycles competitively, like wheel to wheel. I did that after the car racing was over with.
Yeah, you're right about there being so few opportunities for that healthy aggression. And I think that's, maybe the most accessible of that might be martial arts.
Yeah, and I was just going to say BJJ, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, is the shiny new style. And I think that that's why people are willing to pay, 180, $200 a month to go roll with other people, is that it's it not only is it a healthy outlet for aggression, but it's very cerebral. BJJ is highly technical, and the best practitioners tend to be the nerds because you have to have, a great understanding of anatomy and this library of techniques and transitions in your head and be able to execute them very quickly. And it's a very fluid, constant back and forth battle. Um, And the other great thing about BJJ, unlike a lot of other styles, is that you can't train in that style without getting humbled over and over and over again by getting choked out or having to tap out because somebody who's been there for 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 years can just play with you like you're a 2-month-old infant and you're so helpless. You cannot have a big ego if you train in BJJ because you will get humbled constantly. And that's one of the things I appreciate about my school is that it's not a place for a bunch of meatheads or ego people. It's a healthy, supportive environment where people are all trying to get better and help each other get better.
Yeah, and that developing that ability to channel strength and to really feel ourselves as men in our power, but to do it in a healthy way and to know what it feels like to to be dangerous, to have that danger that you hold the capacity for. All of us do. But to be able to hold that in your hands and experience it, to me, makes you a stronger man because you then know you have to put that away. Like you've got it, but you don't, like you understand it. You're more intimately aware of that part of yourself, the dangerous part of yourself.
Mhm. And you have to have a dangerous part of yourself. As Peterson said, if you don't have the capacity for violence, you're not a kind and generous man. You're just helpless. You're weak. You know, that's that's not virtue.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing is, for the guys who are listening to this who maybe don't think that they have a dangerous side, you do, but when you don't have access to it, when you don't know it, then the ways that it comes out are in emotional manipulation. It comes out in all of these really sideways, harmful to yourself and to others means because you really don't know what you're dealing with. You don't understand your power. And so it gets directed either sideways at people in a hurtful way or it gets directed inward. And you
Well, is that having power but not knowing it, or is that the absence of power? I mean, I associate those kind of behaviors with people operating from a place of fracture, a place of weakness, of insecurity, of not really having uh, valid power. You can lash out in destructive ways, you know, yeah, but I don't know that I'd equate that to actually having power.
to me it's the difference between unchecked kind of almost like splattered power. Like it's there, but it's just going all over the place and usually being used more as a defense mechanism to try to protect yourself against things that make you feel emotionally uncomfortable. So it's more like you're just splattering your power all over the place, where some of the methods you're talking about here are about gaining like a functional relationship with that power so that you can use it to your advantage and you can use it well and you can use it to make yourself a better man and to protect people with it rather than hurting other people and yourself with it. That's the way that I see that.
Yeah, and once you know that you have functional power, something that can be channeled and expressed in different ways, whether it's driving really fast or fighting or shooting a gun or whatever the case may be, that allows you to relax and come at challenges from a centered, emotionally regulated place. Um, Part of that is a function of just having done hard things. Um, whether it's the special forces expression, embrace the suck, put on the 100-pound pack and go for a 20-mile hike just because you can't get soft. So you got to go do it, even though you're not going anywhere. You're just going to go in a big circle. You got to be constantly challenging yourself and making yourself do hard things to sustain that edge and sustain that awareness that I can do this. So if I face some new task that I haven't done before, that looks hard, I can remember that, oh, I've done all these other hard things. This doesn't look so bad. So it's one of the reasons I enjoy the ice plunge. Um, you had said splatter, and that immediately reminded me of my coffee analogy. You know, you talk about masculine energy being containment and feminine energy being the chaotic energy and just all over the place. And, I thought, well, okay, so the feminine energy is the hot coffee and the masculine energy is the mug. And they complement each other. Hot coffee without a mug is a painful mess. It needs the coffee mug. The coffee mug's not patriarchal oppression, it's constructive containment of that energy.
Yeah. And also then is able to direct it towards a place where it gets to be as useful and as well utilized as possible.
Spiking my caffeine.
Gotta have it. Robert, we're winding down here in time, and I would love to just hear anything else from you, like things you would love to share with other men, lessons you've learned for yourself, things you would love for men to know that maybe you just don't think that people hear enough, or things that have been really profound to you. What would you love for men to know?
I think the thing that's been front of mind for me over the last few years is that even though I spent a big chunk of my life working on competencies and confidence and skills in a variety of different domains, none of them really addressed the weak spot, which was emotional regulation in the face of chaos. When you're with a partner, and that was a void for me, a lacking that I could handle stress and danger in all kinds of other environments, but when it came to interpersonal and emotional challenges and the chaos of an emotional woman, I was completely disarmed. It was like a white belt being rolling with a black belt at jiujitsu. There's just no, I don't have a prayer, and you know, so having to understand those last points of weakness. And as you'd said in the January 19th episode about you don't have to choose between heart and spine. You can have both. The more you build up your spine, the easier it becomes to soften your heart and to be able to be present with a woman who's upset and not let yourself get emotionally displaced. That you can stay present and attentive and engaged and actively listen and show her that you're understanding and feeling what she's feeling without losing your center. That, building a spine is great as long as you don't see it as be all and end all. It then gives you the foundation to open your heart. And without that connection, without that trust, you never get the magic.
Yeah, the it seems to be the missing piece a lot of times because you can't do like you can do all of the spine building stuff. You can go chop wood, you can go race cars, you can go learn how to fight, you can do all that stuff. And that works with our man brains, right? Do
Mm-hmm.
this and accomplish that.
Right.
But it's a like opening your heart is a surrender. It's letting
Mm-hmm.
something in. It's not you can't do it. You have to open to,
Receive it.
yeah. And like we all want to be loved. We like that's what I think we're after in a lot of this work that men do to be the best we can be, to be strong and solid. We also want to be loved, but we have to be able to let that love in. And that is where the challenge of surrender and softening and opening has to balance out the doing, right?
Yeah. What do you think about the difference for men in being loved versus being respected and appreciated? It's a distinction I've seen talked about, in a variety of places online, and I think it's an interesting one. I think women are very focused on being loved, experiencing love, but for men, the argument that I've heard is that being respected or who you are, what you're capable of, etc., and being appreciated for being who you are and what you are contributing are really precursors to love. Because, it's one thing to love someone kind of at arm's length. Well, I love you, but I'm not in love with you, blah, blah, blah. Love is a very tricky word. It's a Swiss Army knife, and it can mean something different to everybody, and it can change depending on the context. I, worked with a therapist who said, "Yeah, I don't like that word. I don't even want to use that word because it's so vague and multidimensional. It's not useful for communication." But yeah, I mean, it resonates with me that you want to be respected and appreciated. And if you have those things as a man, then there's a potential for love to get stacked on top of that. But I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are on that.
In every experience where I've gotten deep enough with a man whose drive and desire is really to be respected and to be appreciated, and maybe who looks at, if you've done the love languages thing, and almost all men that fall in this category will say that their number one love language is words of affirmation. In every case that I've gotten deep enough with someone, that drive to be respected is really coming from a place where they think that they need to earn love and they want to be seen and validated for the things that they do and loved for their actions, which is really coming from a very deep place of their own pain
Hmm,
and trying to make love into something they can control by doing it right so that they get validated and they get approved of and they get
hmm.
told that they're good.
It's the little boy looking for approval from a parent.
Yeah. And underneath that, like, yes, those things are wonderful and they fill up a part of any man who like puts a lot of love and care and attention into taking care of and giving to and providing and protecting and all of those things. Like they're meaningful, those respectful and appreciative and affirming words. But that is only loving what you do. And there is something so much deeper that's available when you don't need that, when you've met yourself at a deep enough level in your pain where you can give yourself that level of self-respect, that level of self-approval, and you are so full of love for yourself and respect for yourself that you don't need it from someone else, then you can really feel and allow love in at a so on such a more profound level because it you can let someone see you and love you for who you are underneath the actions. So, yes, respect, affirmation, approval, those things are great and they're valuable, but most of the time they're pointing at something where you're still trying to get from outside of yourself what you haven't yet been willing or able to give to yourself.
Hmm. Well, I appreciate the take. I'll have to chew on that.
Thank you, Robert. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on here and share your experiences and your background. I know this is going to be helpful for so many of the guys who listen to this podcast and sometimes get a little bit frustrated with my very emotional take on all of this. And they're like, yeah, but what do I do?
Mhm.
You have such a great breadth of different experiences, which I know we only brush the surface of here in an hour, but thank you so much for coming on and sharing some of your story with us.
I enjoyed it. I spent my life trying to pay things forward, and I hope it's helpful to somebody out there.
I'm sure it will be. Thanks again, Robert.
You bet.